A lot of times, well, back in the early days, the center wing tank would have the irritating failure mode of blowing up. And so we lost a few of those and just surmised that the center wing tank blew up because of an issue with the wiring in it. This is the cockpit of the KC-135, and it's like many other cockpits with the attitude direction indicator. These are the red flags that I mentioned all showed up to tell us that our ADIs were bad that one night. You have 4 engines, and so you've got 4 sets of gauges giving you things like RPM, speed, temperature. There's your landing gear. This is, you've got airspeed and altitude and vertical velocity. But this is the panel that controls all of your fuel tanks on board the KC-135. And okay, I've got another larger picture here. The downside of this picture is that it's an earlier model. You've got your, this gauge right here on the Q model shows you how fast you're offloading fuel to your receiver. You can offload about 6,500 pounds per minute. But just to blow it up a little bit, you can sort of see the outline of the wing tanks. So this is the inboard number 2 tank, the outboard tank, and then the wing tip tank. And then the same on the right-hand side. And these are the body tanks. The other thing that the later version has is it's got an upper body tank that they added to get more fuel aboard the tanker. And then this is the totalizer gauge that adds up all 10 of these tanks, but I never trusted that gauge to be right, so I would always add up the tanks myself. And all of these knobs here are the knobs that control where the fuel can flow. Is it going to flow to the engine, or is it going to flow to another place, like to the aircraft you're trying to refuel? And then these switches here are pumps to pump the fuel. So you've got 10 tanks to play around with in a big airplane that weighs 110,000 pounds empty, 300,000 pounds wet. And so there's plenty of margin, there's plenty of room there for you to make a mistake and put too much fuel in the wrong place and lose your center of gravity and make the aircraft unflyable. These are the tanks I was talking about. The 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the wing tanks, the wing tip tanks, the upper tank that was added later, and the body tanks. So these are the tanks that they would fill with JP7. So, if you're offloading at 6,500 pounds per minute and you're carrying about 160,000 pounds of fuel, you can drop, go from 240,000 pounds to 180,000 pounds in 10 minutes. And if that fuel comes from the wrong tanks, the aircraft becomes unflyable. And I've got a picture of the superhero, the Arrow, here, because an Arrow is stable because you've got the heavy part out front and the light feathers in the back, and that's how airplanes work. If you keep your center of gravity ahead of your center of pressure, you're going to have a stable airplane. But the further back that center of gravity comes, the more likely your aircraft is going to go unstable and go crazy on you and crash and die in your plane. F-16s, for instance, were one of the first aircraft to take advantage of that and move that center of gravity way back and compensate for that with a fly-by-wire system. So the F-16 is incredibly maneuverable because if it wasn't for the fly-by-wire system, it would barely be flying at all. But that's the characteristics of aircraft. The further back that CG comes, the quicker the aircraft can respond.